Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to a video about human rights. This is a new topic, and in this video, this screencast, we're going to talk about what are human rights. We're going to talk about some of the history, the background of where they came from, like thousands of years ago, and then I'm going to walk you through a timeline of events in the past couple of hundred years that have gotten us to where we are today with human rights. So the first question is, what do we mean by human rights? And there's an official definition, but also just casually, human rights, if you ever are just out there in life and you're thinking, hey, this doesn't seem fair. Hey, that doesn't seem fair. Something should be done about that. So the idea of having human rights is about making things fair. So whenever there's injustice, we're going to look at that and we're going to say, hey, is someone's human right being violated? So what's the actual definition? The fundamental rights and freedoms that all people are entitled to simply by the fact that they are human. So key there is everybody on the planet. So not just Americans, not just white people, not just Christians, not just men, but everybody on the planet is entitled to these human rights. With this assignment, I'm attaching a document that has a list of the 30 human rights that are part of the official United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Now, the document is a summary, but you should check out those 30 specific rights so you know what they are. Okay, where do these come from? Well, there's a long tradition in the world's religions and philosophies of having sort of this notion of human rights in them. And I want to just go through a sampling of that. So in Hinduism, that's a religion that has always believed in the sacredness of human life. Every life is sacred. In Christianity, a big part of that is that we're going to relieve people's suffering. We're going to try to reduce suffering, and we're going to love other people as ourselves. So those are things that are kind of part of human rights. With Islam, there's always been an important belief in charity and justice and giving to the poor and helping the poor. With Judaism, the idea of the 10 Commandments, that was like guidelines for ethical behavior. These are the things you do to be ethical. Ancient Chinese philosophies have always sort of talked about the importance of respecting other people and having this common sense of humanity. We're all in it together. We all deserve respect. And a lot of African philosophies, different cultures there, have emphasized the importance of like limiting the power of the chief and making sure that the chief is not oppressive. So human rights is going to kind of build on all these philosophies that are out there, all these religions, and take it from there. So moving up in time, there's some important innovations in human rights over time. And two moments in history were important for human rights. One was the United States Revolutionary War, and the other was the French Declaration of Rights. And the French Declaration of Rights happens right about the same time as our Constitution. Both of these documents talked about the freedom of expression. You can express your beliefs, and particularly your opposition beliefs to the government. They also emphasize the right to vote, the importance of choosing your leader. And they also emphasized that there should be no arbitrary arrest, that the people in power cannot go and arrest people and put them in jail just because for the heck of it. There had to be proof, there had to be facts, there had to be a trial. So about 60 years after those innovations, people were noticing that in wars, a lot of times people were being treated badly. Now, obviously in wars, people are killing each other. But if you're wearing a uniform and you're in the army and you're in the battlefield, it's understood that people are going to get killed. But people were concerned about prisoners and the injured and civilians. And so in 1863, they came up with something called the Geneva Conventions. And these were the regulations that govern war, and they're commonly known as international humanitarian law. But it's about treating prisoners fairly, treating the injured fairly, treating civilians fairly. Now, with the Geneva Conventions, most of the countries in the world have agreed to abide by those. But when we have terrorist attacks, those are groups of people that are not abiding by the Geneva Conventions. So one of the reasons where everybody is outraged by the way terrorists do the things they do, which is like killing innocent people, they're not following the Geneva Conventions for warfare. About a century after that, between World War I and World War II, another American president, Franklin Roosevelt, kind of moved this idea of human rights along a little bit further. We were in the Great Depression for like 8 or 9 years. Things were tough on our people. We were getting ready to go into World War II, and he declared something called the Four Freedoms. And one of the freedoms was speech and expression. One was religion. One was want. And one was fear. So you should have freedom from all of those things. Now, we already had free speech and free religion. That was part of our Constitution. But freedom from want and freedom for fear were kind of new things. Freedom from fear means that you are going to have a police force that protects you and a military that protects your country. Freedom from want means that you're not wanting things. Like you're not wanting food. You're not wanting shelter. You're not wanting medical care. So freedom from want was kind of pushing this idea of human rights in the United States. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came up with this idea in 1941. A couple of things that kind of came out of this was Social Security for old people in the United States, like some money so that they're not living in total poverty when they're older, and also Medicaid and Medicare programs that provide medical care for older people. What's next? So moving along in history, during the Cold War, it's the capitalist United States against the communist Soviet Union. But one way to look at this conflict is a difference between different types of rights that these two societies were emphasizing. In the United States, we're emphasizing civil and political rights. And I'll just read you a list of what that includes. No slavery, no discrimination, no torture, equal protection under the law for all people, men, women, black, white. Providing freedom of movement, the freedom to vote, freedom of thought, opinion, and expression. Also the freedom to associate, to gather in groups, and the freedom of religion. So those are civil and political rights that are super important to us and our society. In the Soviet Union, and this is the 1950s to the 1980s, they were emphasizing social, economic, and cultural rights. The rights to an education, the rights to Social Security, like a retirement fund, the rights of employment, the rights of a fair wage, the rights of equal pay, and the rights to a good standard of living, clothing, food, housing, and medical care. So those are two different sets of rights being emphasized. All of those are going to be part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, while the U.S. and the Soviet Union are kind of in this Cold War, a lot of the world is getting rid of the colonizing powers. So Africa, India, they're getting rid of British and European colonizing powers, and they're getting their freedom. And when they do this, again, it expands the notion of human rights. So they brought this new idea that the right of self-determination, that is a group of people, a country being able to determine their own future, to have their own government, so to not have a colonial power telling them what to do. So that's called the right of self-determination. They also emphasize the importance of the challenges of having equal economic rights. They had been oppressed for decades or centuries, and now there was gross inequality between the colonizing power and the colonized. And they also promoted the elimination of slavery. Even though slavery had been technically eliminated maybe a century before, there was still slavery in the world. So finally, after the Cold War ends, these African countries and India get their independence. There's a big summit in 1993 called the Vienna World Conference on Human Rights. And this is post-Cold War, and they're emphasizing the world's commitment to human rights. So everybody shows up, all the countries of the world, or most of them, and they are ratifying this idea that human rights are important. Everybody has certain rights, and the world needs to uphold those. Okay, so with this unit, we're going to be debating 4 options that the U.S. should do concerning human rights. And I'm including that document with this screencast. So you should check out the 4 options. What should the U.S. be doing about human rights? All right, that's it for today. If you have any questions, email me or see me in class.